You are listening to The Reference Desk, the Wicomico Library's podcast that connects you to your public library. Welcome back to Wicomico County Library's Reference Desk podcast, connecting you with your local library. Today we are exploring a page-to-screen comparison. I am joined by my coworker Will from Pittsville.
Hello.
And today we are going to explore page-to-screen as refers to a couple of comics. Lately, in the last 15 to 20 years, there's been no end of movies and TV shows that have been based on various comic book characters, DC, Marvel, and even some independents. The most successful to date has been Marvel, the graphic novel giant that was founded by Stan Lee. There have also been several movies released based on DC comics that feature Superman, Aquaman, Green Lantern, and others, and they had varying degrees of success. Regardless of which universe you prefer, these movies can be a great way to see your favorite superhero in action. Today we'll be discussing the differences and similarities between the comic book source material and the on-screen adaptation. What did they change? Why do you think they changed it? And did this make any difference in the way the character was portrayed, or the story was portrayed? There are many other nuances to consider with individual productions, which we can address when we get to those titles. So without any further ado, let's talk comics. I'm going to start with the MCU. We'll probably stick with the MCU for this episode. We may end up doing extra episodes that we cover other movies, because there's a lot. The rights to these movies and the characters in the MCU were signed over to Disney in 2009. It was Fox that had them first, right?
Yeah, the X-Men and the Fantastic Four.
That's right. They were from Fox, but they sold them to Disney in 2009, making Captain America a Disney princess. The MCU was just a baby with 2 or 3 movies under its belt. It had the X-Men series, a couple movies in that, and they had the Fantastic Four. That was pretty much all they had released so far.
Right.
Spider-Man's...
Spider-Man's owned by Sony. Well, partially owned by
That's
Sony.
Right. There was some kind of gray area there, but that's true. Spider-Man did a little bit. But...
And the Hulk, movie rights to Hulk are owned by... It's a separate studio. I can't think of their name right now, but... That's why Hulk does not have his own standalone movie, because
they tried
a couple of times.
It would have to be produced by that other studio, not
Disney.
Yeah.
So it started though with Iron Man with Disney when Disney took over. Iron Man, the original comic was written in the 60s by Stan Lee, and introduces us to Tony Stark. He's a playboy billionaire who develops an arc reactor suit due to shrapnel in his chest that's inoperable and can only be prevented from dying by his technology. The subsequent movies expand upon Iron Man and his various foes and loves. I mean, they only have the one in the movies, but he's a playboy, there's more. And builds the basis for the entire Avengers initiative and the universe. One of the biggest changes in the MCU made to the Iron Man story was the timeline. The original comic was set during the Vietnam War era, understandably a hot topic of the day, whereas the movie takes place in the Middle East, in an intentionally vague conflict. Because of this, the characters are of a different ethnicity and background, but the general storyline is the same. In this case, the change in setting makes sense, and as a conflict in the Middle East is far more relatable to a modern audience, as well as the less than stellar conclusion to that particular police action in the 60s. Let's touch on the Hulk. That would be the next one we're working on.
Yeah.
We were talking about the Hulk earlier being a different, not necessarily Disney. So they did a couple movies with that. Let's talk about how that goes.
The movie starts out in like a past prologue scenario. You learn that Bruce's father experimented on himself, and to develop like these, essentially an immunity to gamma radiation, he passes those improvements on to his son, who was conceived not long after. You fast forward to his son, also now a gamma scientist, and another scientist makes some kind of mistake in the middle of the process. Bruce is exposed to massive amounts of gamma radiation, but he survives because of these improvements that his father had made to himself and passed on to him. This is important to point out that General Thunderbolt Ross was a part of those original experiments, and he is in charge of the experiments that Bruce is a part of.
Question, Thunderbolt? Is that his given name?
No, Thaddeus, I think.
Oh, well, yeah, I can see why you go by Thunderbolt. Yeah. I can see why one might want to go by Thunderbolt.
Well, I mean,
it's a much cooler name.
Thad, I guess.
Still not winning me any favors. Go on.
Over the course of the movie, we see Bruce is released from the hospital, and he, is at home. A conflict ensues, if I remember correctly, between him and Talbot, a fellow Talbot. Is in a rage, transforms in the movie anytime he gets enraged or his heartbeat exceeds a certain beats per minute. His father returns as this menacing figure. He has these 3 dogs. One is a poodle.
Of course.
And this obviously is something that's going to come up later, because it's like, why would they have this trio of dogs that is constantly there with the dad? After, I think at some point during that, Bruce hulks out at one point, so people realize, oh, he's this, this green rage monster. Because General Ross is trying to capture Bruce Hulk, it seems like the main protagonist of the movie, but he's actually not. Is actually Bruce's mentally unstable father. Bruce's father has been continuing to experiment on himself since he's been released from jail. Oh, I left out that he murdered Bruce's mother because he tried to kill Bruce back in the day because he thought Bruce was some kind of genetic mistake.
You mean the one that he intentionally made, and so it was his genetic mistake?
Well,
Wow.
He used the technology that turned Bruce into the Hulk to further enhance himself, and
That always goes so well.
Well, he intentionally bites into high voltage cables that are powering all of San Francisco or something like that, and he develops energy powers and transforms into this energy being called Absorbing Man, and he goes into the clouds and water, and it's this whole nonsensical combat that goes on between them.
What's Stanley on?
Well, this is the movie.
Oh, this is the movie.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then,
Point still stands.
Well, he's ultimately killed in an explosion, and everyone thinks that Bruce was killed in the same explosion. But as far as the comics, it's a little bit different. Now, the original Hulk series came out in 1962. This influenced, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Stan Lee's the writer, Jack Kirby's the illustrator. This influenced how they portrayed Bruce getting his powers. Give you a frame of reference, this would have been like the old atomic experiments back in the day. You can imagine like a big mushroom cloud, soldiers and scientists inside some kind of bunker, as opposed to this controlled lab where Bruce is doing his experiments in the movie. And that's important because, again, well, in this instance, Thunderbolt Ross he's in command of these experiments, but Bruce finds himself in the blast zone because a kid named Rick Jones has found himself somehow, despite being on a military installation, finds himself in the middle of the test range. Bruce races out there in a Jeep to save him. He tells one of his fellow scientists, hold it off while I go get this kid, but that fellow scientist is a Russian spy, so he doesn't hold it off. Bruce manages to save the kid, but he gets caught up in the explosion. Somehow the kid doesn't get any of the radiation.
Oh, you know why? Because his name doesn't have the 2 letters in the first and last name aren't the same.
Well, could be that.
I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, he eventually develops Hulk-like powers.
Oh, does he? Okay.
But that's not for another 50, 60 years. But, well, yeah.
Just in time for retirement. Excellent.
The kid gets pushed into a trench, gets no powers.
Aww.
Bruce gets still right there, mere meters away, develops these powers.
One can almost say that was a selfish move on Banner's part.
Could be. I mean, who would have known? Bruce originally is not green like we know him to be. He originally started out as gray. That was because Stan Lee did not want the Hulk to be associated with any race or to lean into any kind of stereotypes. Originally, Bruce only transformed into the Hulk at night. And he was still intelligent. Maybe not as intelligent as Bruce, but he was still intelligent. Bruce used a machine to change the Hulk, so he became green, and he had, Bruce's intelligence when he transformed, but Bruce continued to use the technology, to maintain his intelligence and choose to transform into the Hulk, to the point where it turned the Hulk into a mindless rage monster.
We know and love.
That's basically where the Hulk's original run ended, because after the first 6 issues, it was canceled. This was very common back in the early days, because the X-Men was canceled, and I think another comic was canceled after its initial run, because originally the numbers coming in didn't seem like it was selling well, and then they became like a cult classic, and then they were obviously restarted. And the Hulk story obviously didn't end, because he went on to be show up in the Fantastic Four, And he was a founding member of the Avengers, and he was in other, like they had titles like Journey into Mystery and stuff like that. And he and Giant Man and Wasp showed up in those stories. But the Hulk transforming due to anger and an increased heart rate was a development after that initial run.
Because originally it was something he did consciously, right?
Yeah. It was either at night or something he induced himself.
Okay.
He was not originally a rage monster during that, I think, that original run. It was something that either developed right at the end or that too came after. It wasn't until 1985 that we're introduced to his father.
Oh, okay.
His father wasn't even a thing.
The guy with the 3 dogs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
He was the same in this way. In issue 312, his father's introduced, and it's shown that the father is abusive and all these other things. The abuse led Bruce to develop there's a different name for it now. It was called multiple personality back then. I think it's
Dissociative disorder, yeah.
And Bruce develops this dissociative identity disorder that basically is the same setup. They basically retcon his origin a little bit, and they still don't give an explanation for a good explanation, I'll say, for why he survives the radiation in comic book fashion. Somehow his multiple personality disorder and his internalized rage allow him to become the Hulk. The Hulk is the embodiment of his internalized rage, and it is effectively a separate personality.
I think he needs to go to therapy.
The father did want to kill Bruce in the comics, as he considered him to be a genetic mistake, but it doesn't indicate that he performed any kind of experiments on himself. He just, I guess, in his madness, assumed that his son was a genetic mistake. He also, in the comics, murdered his mother. So there's that.
Great guy.
So that is the movie, and then there's the comic.
So I think next we'll do Civil War. I've recently reread the Civil War issues 1 through 7, which are available on Hoopla, and we will include links to all of the comics we're talking about today in the description down below of our podcast. So you have watched the movie. I'm sorry to admit, I have not watched Civil War. That is one of the only Avengers movies I have not managed to watch. For some reason, just got missed. So what I would like to do is I want to talk about the comics and the basic plotline of the comics for Civil War series 1 through 7, or comics 1 through 7. And then if you want to go and say, or if you can even just let me know where it varies, and we can talk about the differences between why we think they did what they did in what spot. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Civil War is a comic that was written by Mark Miller. The Civil War issues 1 through 7 were released in 2006, 2007. And there's over 70 crossover issues because, every single superhero from the MCU was in here.
Pretty much.
It brought to light the politics that ran through the superhero community. And these are politics that you can still relate to even today. And it wasn't that long ago, so I guess it's still very relatable. In the comic source material, the plot is kickstarted by collateral damage, a villain and hero fight. And then, in the process of this villain and hero fight, there is a building that falls down and kills people, including children, and the entire population of the town is like, you guys are evil, why are you killing us, you're supposed to save us. They're outraged over this, what they see as a senseless death of innocence, and it causes the government to launch an initiative geared toward registering all superheroes, putting them essentially in the employ of the government and holding the heroes accountable for their actions. The initiative is met with resounding support from the public and Tony Stark, who sees the value in being accepted instead of reviled, and he supports these measures along with Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four. Captain America, on the other hand, isn't comfortable with the idea for many reasons. Personally, I think he sees too many parallels between the registration of superheroes and the registration of other minorities during a different war in a different time period. He's been through it, he's seen it. So from there's a divide between the pro and anti-registration supers. I'm using supers like in The Incredibles because it's easier.
It works. Or capes, I think they call them.
No capes.
Well,
the government... That's a different universe entirely. The government, along with Tony Stark, requires heroes to reveal their secret identity, and any hero they track down that opposes the measures of registration are sent to a prison that's codenamed 42, and it's in the negative zone. Yeah. Now, maybe Tony's a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because 42 is the answer to all of life's problems. But then it's actually told later on that 42 is just idea number 42 out of 100 that Reed Richards had to solve the problem, which I think is a lot more boring. I wish they'd done a reference to Hitchhikers, but whatever.
I'm sure there's some licensing reason.
Very likely so, yes. But 42 was funny to me. Ultimately, the things come to a head when Cap and his compatriots try to access the prison to, have a good old-fashioned jailbreak. Iron Man and his team catch up with them, and a citywide battle ensues. Just as Cap is getting the upper hand, he realizes that heroes fighting heroes is the antithesis of their goals. He surrenders to the authorities as Steve Rogers, not Captain America, and is taken in. As the plans for regulation of heroes starts to become a reality, the story ends for this issue, for now. And if you'd like to read more of this gripping story, because I think it's an absolutely fantastic storyline. It's all available in Hoopla, as I said before. Now we'll hand it over to Will. What differences do you remember from the movie? Because I think that's pretty much the movie plot.
Well, this movie is actually one of the more faithful of the ones that we could potentially talk about, because it does basically follow that overall theme. The differences are in the specifics. This Civil War follows Age of Ultron. This is about the events that happen in the fictional country of Sokovia.
Yes.
And this one involves like a meeting of major world powers in this particular country, this Germany type situation.
It's supposed to be Germany, yeah.
I think essentially it is basically the same, that they want to register all super people, although really the only super people are the Avengers for the most part. And the Avengers basically kind of already work for the government anyway, so
S.H.I.E.L.D. is kind of one of those, hidden stepchild of the government anyway.
Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. by this point is gone, because
that's true.
It's disbanded. But I think that probably actually kind of played into that sentiment that the powerful needed to be governed in some way. There's again the same conflict between Cap and Iron Man, but I think they add the impetus in this. They kind of shift because they realized that this conflict didn't make quite as much sense because there's less supers and stuff like that. So they include an element of the Winter Soldier showing up and the Winter Soldier being a part of it. Steve's loyalty to his childhood best friend, but it's actually revealed that the Winter Soldier is responsible for the death of Tony's mother and father. And so that's an element in it too, in addition to the registration angle. And they had this big fight at an airport. And maybe, now that I'm realizing it, so the Vision was created in Age of Ultron, which is a whole
Vision was actually in the comics. He actually disabled Iron Man's outfit, or Iron Man's outfit, his costume, his armor. And he basically reaches through the armor and shocks it, and disables it so Cap can actually pound him.
Well, actually, I was thinking, what is it in the Vision shooting down, War Machine, is a nod to the death Black Goliath Bill Foster. But that's just something I'm realizing now. They have this fight that is supposed to be similar to the end fight in the...
do they have Robot Thor in there?
No, Robot Thor is not a thing, and that's a whole...
If you want to learn about Robot Thor, please read the comics. They're really good.
He's called Ragnarok.
I call him Robot Thor.
Well, that too. That fight ensues where, now this is largely where they basically diverges, because the end of the movie is this Iron Man understandably wanting to kill the man who murdered largely his mother, because he has a complicated relationship with his father. Who
doesn't?
God knows. This is more a conflict between Cap and Iron Man than it is, and I guess it is in the comics as well. And it is really an interesting reflection in both cases on the personalities of the other. I have to say that Robert Downey Jr. did a better job of portraying Iron Man as this. His perspective, again, the motivations are slightly different because it involves the murder of his parents. But period, I think Robert Downey Jr. did a better job of humanizing Iron Man, because I am not a fan of Iron Man. But I respected and understood his motivations in this instance. I mean, the major difference is that there's the undercurrent that the Winter Soldier is responsible for the death of his parents. The overall registration is less meaningful because it's just not a thing. There are
Yeah.
no supers in the world like that. They would just be registering maybe 20 people at most.
There were so many, like I said, there was like 70 crossovers. So you had so many superheroes that just showed up, and you're like, there's not a single person who's not wearing spandex in the entire comic. So like, it's all comic. The only thing I will say, what I took away from it was Captain's main objection to the government oversight of the supers. And he made this comment, saying about the fact that we will be in the government's employ, we will be fighting the bad guys, but where do we draw the line, and when does the government tell us this is the bad guy, you're going to fight him regardless of whether he's bad or not? Why do they get to decide who the bad guy is? And that's where his concern fell.
And that's probably an
he had no
overriding-
issue really with the revealing a super identity, and he understood there needed to be some kind of accountability, but he wanted to be self-governing because he was worried that if you were in the employ of somebody, they say jump, you have to ask how high or risk being put in the negative zone.
I mean, and that is a parallel, because I know that comes up in a conversation between amongst the Avengers about the Accords. And I think the lines that are drawn are pretty, Rhodey's going along with it because Rhodey's an Air Force officer and that kind of thing. And so the reasons for why some people went one way or the other makes sense. That a lot of the thing that I find fascinating about the comics is who actually decides with who and why. I've read different things about people's mentality for that kind of thing. Also, Black Panther, if I remember correctly, is introduced in Civil War. Obviously, he had his own introduction in the comics. Civil War, his impetus for this is the death of his father.
Yes, because someone killed his father. One of the, I think it was in the movie, it was what's his face, right?
It's, he's called Baron Zemo in the comics, but he's a special ops. He's a spy for the fictional nation of Sokovia, and he's basically getting his revenge.
Here's Sokovia, I think Genovia, like from the Princess Diaries, and that is not the same country at all.
No. Totally different end, or one's not ended, but I digress. That's the major differences here are the motivations for Iron Man in this instance, because it had to compensate for the fact that the Avengers have only really known each other in the movies for 2 or 3 years, whereas in the comics it's been 70 years, but from their perspective, they've known each other for about 10 years.
Yeah, it's been a little longer. And I think Iron Man, the only real, and the reason you root for Captain in Civil War, the comic, a little more is because Tony Stark, Iron Man, his motivation in the comic books, unless I missed something entirely, is not as clear cut. It's not like his parents died. It's literally just, and it comes across as, I'm worried about my image. I want to look good. I want the public to love me. I want them to adore me. So I'm going to support this measure because it means I will get the love that I deserve and that I want, because the boy needs therapy. And he definitely is looking for acceptance. And that's his driving motivation, is the acceptance. And it's all very self-centered for him. He doesn't care who gets run over in the way. He doesn't care if his best friend goes into the negative zone. As long as he gets the adoration that he feels is his due, he'll support this measure. And that's, I think, why everyone roots for Cap in the comics. Because Captain America, his motivation is more, I don't want to see a repeat of 1945. Iron Man is, I want my friends to like me again, which is a little bit infantile.
Yeah, I mean, the Iron Man's, that flaw in Iron Man continues to repeat itself.
Yes,
and this goes to an earlier conversation we were having before we started recording. These male characters get these, there's nothing Iron Man can't do, but the reason why Iron Man can't accomplish a lot of the things that Iron Man wants is because of Iron Man's personality flaws,
Or the fact that if he takes that little piece of glowing arc reactor out of his chest, he'd die.
Well, now they fixed that. He doesn't need that anymore. They a lot of those old 1960s, 70s, like, things that held the character back.
His chest is his chest.
Have been taken away. Professor Xavier walks now, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I have questions about that. We can talk about that in another episode.
Yeah, that's a whole other separate thing. My favorite thing is talk about the X-Men. But yeah,
we can have a conversation about the X-Men. That's fine.
Because they have registration too, but it's like completely different.
It was definitely a very similar. It's a definitely similar theme to the Civil War theme.
Which is, there's...
It comes down to othering.
I could go...
No, we don't have time for
No,
that
I mean,
today.
yeah, I could go into detail about the...
And I will! Not today. Yeah, it was a really enjoyable read. I really enjoyed that.
I have not read, obviously, either the 70 or the first, but that's when that kind of started to move me in the direction of it was the earlier Avengers Disassembled event that led to M-Day, which is Scarlet Witch, going as female characters tended to do. Female characters tend to be a little mentally unstable. Has this whole thing, she takes away mutants' powers. This is also leads to a whole, again, mutant registration, which is there have been different ones, but yeah, it's Civil War is an incredibly successful event, and I think that Marvel's been trying to recreate that with all these not as well developed events, major events, because it was kind of what led me in the direction of reading comics again. It was largely the Young Avengers actually is what got me into comics. And the Miles Morales, their debuts.
Yes, Spider-Verse was fantastic.
Well, no, this was.
That's right. There was an entire series, wasn't there?
This was back in 2005 when I think both Young Avengers and Miles Morales came into being. It was a way for me to get into comics at the ground floor. This black Spider-Man, and then this new team of characters that you don't have to go back and learn their whole
entire backstory.
Yeah. Of 50 years worth of backstory of not the best written stories. I know that people love them, but they're a little hokey. I started reading some of the early X-Men stuff, and it's like...
I can forgive a lot of bad writing if the plot's good.
Yeah, I mean, the X-Men animated series adapted a lot of that stuff, and that to me shows that it's possible to take the bones of a good story and update them. So there's the like you said, if the plot's good, then yeah, I get it. But it's a little hokey that the original X-Men villain wants to get into the Pentagon to get these plans, these war plans for the government or whatever. It's like that doesn't really work. Or back in the old cartoons, that there was this gun that the government had developed that magically altered itself to shoot whatever ray would kill this villain or this hero or whatever else.
It's called a plot device.
No.
Well, we've established that. At that point, we were actually running low on time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. I hope you learned something. I hope it sparks an interest in you to go and check out some comics, because, fun fact, per page, if you're wondering about graphic novels, per page, they have more new words on a page than most novels do with no pictures. So if you want your kid to read and learn new words, the best way to do it is to get them to start reading graphic novels. It helps younger readers and emerging readers with looking at pictures and making comparisons and looking for context. They can look at a word they don't know, and they can look what's happening in the picture, and they can infer most of the time what this word means. So it's a really great learning tool for reading and expanding your vocabulary. It's a quick little plug for literacy, because I can't help that.
That's what my senior thesis was about.
Hey, cool. Mine was on the National Park System. And so as you can see, there's no end to options to with the movies that have come out lately. You find the corresponding or the origin or the source material comic, and you read it, and you can see the changes they make. Sometimes they make it for time constraints, sometimes they make it for relatability, sometimes they make it because they thought it'd be fun.
Or that the actors
are willing to do
Robert
this.
Downey Jr. has made
He made Iron Man so relatable and so human.
Well, in the X-Men films, it's because Logan was the center of everything, so a lot of things were
it's Hugh Jackman, so yeah. He's
a wonderful person.
Absolutely. So from there, we're going to encourage everyone who's listening, please go on to either Hoopla or your local library and go find a comic book to read, find the source material, and look at your movies differently, because it's a really great way to get some nuance that maybe isn't is nodded to on the screen, but maybe it's not given to you like force-fed. So it's a great way to get the details and nuances of a movie that you maybe missed the first time, or the second time, or the fourth time you watched it.
And also buy comics.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's there's a couple comic book stores that are locally owned in the area. Please feel free to check those out. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and let you go. we'll talk to you next time, and we're hopefully going to have another comic book talk at some point in the future. And for now, it's just Will and Vicki signing off.
Bye-bye.
Until next time.
Future episodes may feature a variety of topics, ranging from storytelling, arts and crafts, reader's advisory, reference questions, discussion, and more. We also encourage feedback through our Facebook page or in the comments section on the podcast. Visit us online at www.wicomicolibraries.org. Search for Wicomico Libraries on your favorite podcasting site. You can call us at 410-546-5397, or you can email us at center@wicomico.org. That is CENTRE @wicomico.org.